Welcome back to Demystifying Self-Publishing. I'm your host, Alyssa, and today we are honored to welcome a truly powerful and inspiring guest, Elaine Alec. Elaine is a renowned speaker, Indigenous author, and creator of the Indigenous-led Cultivating Safe Spaces framework. She's the author of the acclaimed book, Calling My Spirit Back, a deeply personal and moving exploration of healing, identity, and leadership rooted in Indigenous knowledge and teachings. Through her work, Elaine has become a leading voice in conversations around reconciliation, trauma-informed leadership, and cultural revitalization. She brings a rare combination of vulnerability, strength, and wisdom that challenges us to think deeper and lead with heart. Thanks for being here today, Elaine.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. I would love to jump right into your book, Calling My Spirit Back. It blends memoir, healing, and spiritual teachings. What inspired you to write it, and what was the writing process like for you?
So my first book, I started writing in my 20s. Like I knew when I was like 10 years old, I wanted to be a writer. And then I started writing my first book when I was in my early 20s, and I had 100 pages of that book and I couldn't finish it. And it wasn't until I traveled across British Columbia back in 2019. I sat in circle with a number of families of our missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, 2S LGBTQIA+. And one of the things that they kept saying, because I would always start off circle by introducing myself and telling a bit of my story, and they always came up to me afterwards and said, keep telling your story. Your story is our story. I can't tell my story yet. And so please keep telling yours because I feel seen by this. And when I was done that work, I came home and I told my husband, I said, I always wanted to write this book, but now I feel I have to. This is a responsibility for me to get this book out there. And that was what drove me. I was writing that book to every young Indigenous girl out there who never felt seen. And as I started writing, I decided to try to add some teachings into it to help people who wanted to facilitate conversation and community in a way where people could be open and honest. And so it was through writing that book that Cultivating Safe Spaces started to come out of that book. And so it took me years and years to write the book, but when it came down to finishing that book, I pretty much rewrote the beginning part, and it took me 29 days to write that
Wow.
book in December. I started December 1st and I finished before the end of December, and that was my first draft.
Wow. And after your first draft was completed, what were the next steps? So you had written this book. Did you know at that point that self-publishing was the route that you wanted to take? Were you going to explore traditional publishing routes? What was going through your mind in how you were going to get this book in front of the people who really needed to receive it?
I started to connect and write letters to publishing houses, um, and then I started to research self-publishing. And then I thought, this is going to be a lot of work. And as I finished that book, when I read through it, I thought, maybe I'll just take it to Staples and make photocopies and just hand it out to people, because who's going to want to buy this book? And so I pushed through it and I kept editing it. And my husband and I had to move, and COVID started happening just as I was like getting in touch with Tellwell, because I started to like research different places and self-publishers, and I finally connected with Tellwell, and I knew that I wanted to do it, and I knew that it was going to have to be an investment in myself. And
Mhm.
I talked to my husband about it and I said, is this the right time for me to self-publish this book? Can we afford this? You know, it's COVID. Who's going to be reading books during COVID? And so that's like where I was seriously going. And then my husband said, no, we're going to do this. And so he let me use his line of credit to pay for the self-publishing of my first book. But One of the things that really got me, that kind of stopped me from writing and finishing the book, was I only learned this after I started really getting into like decolonizing my work and understanding what colonial systems are and how deeply embedded they are into systems. And I started to realize how colonial publishing is, how the whole process is so built from fear and control.
Mm.
And so for me, that's what colonial means. Anything, any process, any decision that's made from fear and control. And so the moment I started working with people who were like established authors or established people who had been published, or they started talking about the process of what you have to do to write a book, and you have to write a book proposal, and it has to have this structure, and it has to be this linear thing that you go through. And I struggled with that. And I couldn't figure out how to do it that way. And so, one of my idols, I didn't know who she was when I was a kid, but I grew up around her, and it was Lee Miracle. And she's one of the Indigenous matriarchs of literature in Canada. And when I asked her for her advice, she said, "Writers write." And that was all her advice to me. And I remember being so frustrated, but when I finally got my first draft done of my book, I understood it. I just wrote. But the thing about that is that I wrote for myself. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't write for a publisher. I didn't write for an audience. I didn't identify that audience and put together a marketing plan. I wrote that first draft for me. And as soon as I realized that that draft was mine, my fingers just flew, right? I just was able to get it all out because I wasn't afraid of what the publisher would say, of what an editor would say. I wasn't afraid of the audience or who was going to buy this or what would they think. I was just right. It was like, this first draft is mine and no one's going to see it but me. And so I didn't even write the book, from beginning to end. I wrote by themes. I decided I want to write about my sobriety. I want to write about parenting. I want to write about this experience. And so that's what I put on posters on my wall, like flip chart paper. I put
Yeah.
one theme and then I'd take notes on what I wanted to talk about under it. And I only wrote that piece when my heart was in it. So
Mm.
if I just finished having a parenting moment, or if I was talking to my husband about something and it inspired me, I'd come and sit down and just write about that piece. And then I pulled it together and like did the order of it afterwards. So, realizing that I don't have to do this the way they tell you have to. It's all made up. It's just something somebody created, to control the process. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so I really started to figure out like, if I want to do this, I have to be able to do it for me first. And that was the only way that I was able to write the book. And that's why I love Tellwell so much. When I sent the book, and Simon was the first one to read my book and give me feedback, and then learning he had a background in linguistics and
Mm.
I have Insilchen in my book, that was like the way he came into it and the way he approached it was from a decolonial lens. He wasn't an editor that came in and tried to like blend it to like make it sell. Most people are like,
Right.
we're going to sell this and you got to do this to sell it. It
Mm.
was like really honoring who I was in my teachings. And it's really hard for editors to edit for people who speak other languages or for
Right.
Indigenous people, because there's proper grammar. And the way we talk, it's not about proper grammar. It's about
Mm-hmm.
what is the story and what is in your heart. And does the English language truly capture what is on our heart? And the one thing I learned from that was that you're going to have to sell your own book no matter who you go through, because I have
Yes.
friends who are signed to traditional publishers, and they still have to do the work. People think that, oh, if I get traditionally published, they're going to sell my book for me and they're going to do this for me. They don't. You have to do it yourself. So you have to make a commitment to step out of your comfort zone, to put yourself out there. And so I have social anxiety. I have a lot of those tapes that are like, I'm not good enough. Nobody's going to love me. But I'm also an entrepreneur. And so when I took a look at the royalties you make as a self-published author and the royalties you make as a traditional publisher, I was like, why would anybody do that?
The math isn't mathing.
I understand it.
Yeah, I think that it's really interesting that you talk about how traditional publishing very much gatekeeps the process of publishing. It very much determines who is worthy of having their words heard or their words read, and the the support behind the project from their marketing team, put in bookstores, etc. And when we think about that and we think about all of the voices out there who have previously been suppressed, to then, as yourself, step back and say, I can take my voice and I can pursue this route that is for me. And self publishing, very much right in the name, is for yourself. It allows for you to take that leap, whether your motive is to leave a legacy or to educate or to inspire. And that's what you felt called to do when you took a step back and realized some of the barriers that exist through the traditional publishing route. And I just think that it provides a really great teaching to so many people who maybe think that they need to be traditionally published in order for their work to be valid. That is such a huge misconception when it comes to self-publishing.
That's exactly what I felt. And like, well, if I'm self-published, like I'm not a real writer because anybody
Mm,
can self-publish. But no, not anybody can self-publish because not anybody writes the book,
right,
right? Until you've written that book, like you don't know like what you've had to do to get through that. Not everybody can do it. You are your greatest enemy. You
mm,
know, anything that you can accomplish, a lot of it comes down to your internal dialogue with yourself and your experiences that have told you that you're not good enough, you're not worthy, you're not these things. And so when you're challenged in those moments, those voices are amplified and
right,
you have to do the work to push past that. And so the work that it takes for somebody to write a book and then publish, either way, you're battling these like inner demons that have been with you since childbirth, like since the moment
right,
you were born and came into this world. You're battling all of those things that you've learned, you know, to protect yourself and to not be vulnerable in this world. And writing a memoir and writing any kind of book, that is vulnerability because
right,
that's your baby. You have put everything you are into this and then you bring it out to the world. And so anybody who has the courage to even put that, like not everybody can do that. And so that's what I learned going through the process and then just working hard to get it established. And so I did with my second book, I had the opportunity to go with a traditional publisher and I decided not to. Like, I really went through it, and it was through one of the publishing houses that I dreamed of being published with when I was a teenager. Somebody like a publishing house that I followed their work for a really long time. And I was like, I'm going to be one of those authors. And when it came down to it, I realized no, because as much as they say they are this place, that vibe is still there, that process is still
right.
there, that like, it does not support the humanness, right? It is all about sales. It is all about that piece. And I didn't want to give pieces of my story away or leave them out to make somebody else more comfortable, right? Like their
Absolutely.
comfort of like, are we really going to publish this? So they're working from fear and control. And so then they put that control and process on the writer. And so I really had to think about it. And I decided not to. And I decided to come back to Tellwell to do my second book because of the experience. Like the biggest piece really was working with an editor who was very aware, like
Hmm.
very in tune with like Indigenous stories. And because he's not Indigenous to this place. And because I also didn't want an Indigenous editor, I had an Indigenous editor do my first draft to help me. But the rest of it, I wanted it to be a non-Indigenous editor because I wanted to see what I was writing that that he didn't understand. Because I'm Indigenous, I just assume everybody knows what I know or understands why I say it this way. And so to work with him, for him to be like, okay, well, what does this mean? And I'm like, really, you don't know that? Like, do I really
Right.
have to explain it? And even if he
Right.
did know it, he had the lens of a non-Indigenous person saying, like, if you write it and you don't explain what this is, you're only writing for Indigenous audiences who get it. If a non-Indigenous person picks up this book, they're not going to understand it. And if you're an Indigenous author who wants an Indigenous exclusive audience, then that's fine. But I believed that the things that I knew and the things that came from my people were meant to be shared with everybody.
Right.
That was our belief, and that comes through our creation stories. And so, that it's not exclusive to just my people. It's for everybody. And so I did want to make sure that I wrote books that everybody could see themselves in, even though it was written by an Indigenous woman.
Right. And I had an episode with Simon Ogden, our
Mhm.
managing editor, who it is that you're referencing here, and his perspective as well on the collaboration between an editor and an author is, as the editor, he represents not the author but the reader, and being able to read and reflect and offer that insight to an author so that their work can be received in the way that it's intended to be received, because you are so close to your work and your work is so intimately known by you. It's really easy to overlook some of these things that maybe wouldn't be received by a non-Indigenous person, as you mentioned. So I'm happy that you had a great experience with him. He will be thrilled to hear this little shout out and reflection in the episode, I'm sure. Now, in many Indigenous cultures, storytelling holds great power. How do you see your role today as a storyteller?
So I grew up knowing that our words aren't, you're not supposed to write them down. That's not our way. And so I was trained from like a really young child to listen really closely. And I talk about this all the time. Like, I was raised to listen with discipline. Can I listen to everybody's voice, whether I agree with them or not? And can I listen to every voice, even if their belief isn't my belief or their values aren't my value? Can I still listen with discipline to them? And can I listen without judging what they're saying as right or wrong, good or bad? And can I listen to learn and not listen to be right? Where I'm only listening so that I can debate back with you about why I'm right and you're wrong.
Right.
That's how we listen now. That's how the general population listens. And that's why there's division about everything. And we can't handle when somebody doesn't agree with us, or we just break down. It's like we crumble. We can't
Right.
handle it. And we get really emotional and angry or sad or triggered or upset. Like, all these things happen because we don't know how to listen with discipline anymore.
Everything that is said is with the intention to prove, attack, divide, and because there isn't the ability to sit and listen with discipline, that's how everything is received. Even if the intention isn't necessarily that, that's maybe the listener being on the defense instead of, as you're discussing, listening to learn and understand and develop further opinions.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So when we were little and we were taught to do that, it just became a way of showing up in the world. So I learned to listen and not react right away or not form an opinion right away, because I was taking this is just information. And so when I look at like media and when I look at news reports and, breaking news and something comes out and they share things without all the information, that leaves so much space for everybody to take a side. And assume what they think the story's about, and then they get worked up about it. And then as the story trickles through, you see people like picking sides, or like they've picked a side now, even though there's more information, they're so that's their side, that they don't want to look like they're, you know
Flip-flopping.
yeah, like
Mm-hmm.
pick a side. That's what I used to
Yeah.
always hear when I was younger. Like, you need to pick a side. Stop sitting on the fence. And so I always felt that pressure to respond. And so growing up and listening to our elders like that, I never was allowed to like take notes. And when I got older and I started like going to elders for advice, and I'd bring a laptop or a notebook to write, they wouldn't
Right.
talk until I put it away. And so then I'd have to really pay attention. And one of the best things that I've learned from that was like, listen with discipline. And if you listen with discipline, those words will always be with you, even if you don't remember them right away, even if you don't understand it. As you get older and you gain knowledge, and you start to get smarter and be able to retain things and understand things more broadly, those stories you heard that you didn't understand at a younger age come back to you, and then they make sense. And so the teachings come to you when you need it the most. And so, people will stop listening if they don't understand it or they don't get it. But we were taught to listen even if you don't get it, even if you don't understand it, because I'm going to need this when I'm older. And that's what these books are. These are from me listening with discipline and not getting it when I was a kid, and only starting to understand it as I got older, as I got sober, as I got everything that I went through. These stories started, I'd remember them. And so I remember that. But then I also remember in the 80s when my elders from our nation came together and they said, we're losing our language and our stories. We're losing our teachings. Our kids don't know how to speak the language anymore. Like, how are we going to pass this knowledge on? And they made a decision then that they would write our stories on paper. And so they gave permission to start writing some of those stories down. And now, you can search, and a lot of our Indigenous scholars have our creation stories in their theses. And so you can like look those up and read about them. And so it's a responsibility for
Mm-hmm.
me. And, I share about it in my book, but our people are called Sinclaip's people. And that means we're Coyotes people. And Coyotes people were given the responsibility to teach. And so if you know the stories, if you know anything, you have a responsibility to teach what you know, no matter what it is. And so that's something that like everybody is born with value, and whatever you learn in your life, you have a responsibility to pass that knowledge on, however that looks. And so I learned to write because I felt like when I was younger I didn't have a voice, because I grew up in an alcoholic family. And so I was afraid to speak up or speak out. I didn't want to be attacked or get in trouble or shamed. And so I learned to put all of my feelings in writing. And so that was the only way that I could express who I was when I was little. So, writing, I think for a lot of people is that, because we feel like we don't have a voice, and the only way that we can, express ourselves is through written word now. And so,
Right.
I share it for all of those reasons. I share the stories because I don't want to promote silence or shame for things that happen, because that's what colonialism teaches us. You have to be quiet about it. You're not like, you can't handle it. You might trigger someone, all of that stuff, that fear of not being human and having human experiences. And so I really believe storytelling's a responsibility. If you know something, you have a responsibility to share it in whatever way that you know how, whether that's through writing, whether that's through art, whether that's through song, whether that's through speech. If you know something, that's a gift that was given to you.
Right.
So you should share it. Don't sit on your gifts.
Mm. You have spoken about addiction and trauma and intergenerational pain. How do you navigate telling these truths while also offering hope to the people who are receiving the information? And how do you take care of yourself when you're navigating some of those difficult truths as well?
My first book, I wrote that first draft in my 20s. This is what I heard. I can't remember who said it now, but they said, you have to learn how to write from the scar and not the wound. And I wrote my first 100 pages of my first book from the wound, my bleeding wound. And
Right.
I was the victim. I was the hero in the story. I did nothing wrong. Everything was done to me, and this was my life. Look at me now. I made it, and I'm alive. That type of thinking was where I was. I don't think that book would have sold, but I learned and healed and got sober and felt my feelings, stopped criticizing, condemning, and complaining about everything. And I started to take accountability for a lot of ways that I was behaving as an adult in this life, in this moment. I didn't have to take accountability for the bad things that happened to me because it wasn't my fault. But I did have to learn how to be accountable to myself in this life today because that's not me anymore. That's not my life anymore. That's not happening to me anymore. But I kept acting like it was still happening and I was still in that space. And so I was staying a victim because I didn't want to feel. And feelings are the things you need to do. Feeling is what you have to do to heal. It's written, in neuroscience books. When you talk about the brain and what you need to heal and how you need to heal from trauma, there are certain things you have to do to help heal the chemicals in your brain from trauma. And as long as you put that wall up and pretend everything's okay, like nothing ever happened, and I'm strong and I'm not going to cry about it. I don't want them to think that, they got to me, so I'm not going to cry, I'm going to be strong. As long as we do that, those self-defeating behaviors and that victim mentality will always be there.
Mm.
Whenever something happens and triggers you, you're going to revert back to that behavior and you're going to be dysregulated and people will walk on eggshells around you. And, that life is just so exhausting. I know because I was that person and I know how exhausted people were to be around me. And I know how exhausted I was to be around my mom, when she was practicing alcoholic. So going through all of that and learning that, we have to be able to feel in order to heal. I knew that as I wrote that book, I was going to have to be honest about how I was feeling about things. And if things came up, how my body was responding to that. So I went to ceremony. I would jump in the water, in the ice cold water any time of the year. And I would go to therapy, and I also went to AA, which is Alcoholics Anonymous. And I did all of these things during that time for different parts of me because rewriting the first 100 pages was the hardest part.
Mm.
And I didn't want to get triggered and write from the wound. I
Right.
didn't, because that would be harmful to people, other people
Mm.
reading it, reading somebody's writing from the wound. And so I prayed a lot and I did ceremony and I talked to elders and I put so much intention into that book that as I was editing it, I was saying that to myself and into that book that I want people who read this to find it as medicine and that the people who read it will be helped and not harmed. And I really did that. Like I was really intentional when I went through the editing process. Like that first draft was for me. So there was still some anger, still some blame, still some, do I need to tell that story? Like, do I need to
Right.
tell it in that way? Where is that coming from? Is that an unhealed part of myself that still
Mm.
needs work? And so it was therapy for me to write that book because I was like, hey, that doesn't need to be in there. That's some work I need to do. I don't need to
Right.
put it out there like that.
Can we take a moment to just acknowledge how powerful everything you just said is? To be able to, in present day, reflect back to when those wounds were very fresh and you are writing through that pain, through that anger, through that trauma, and through the mindset of a victim, and for you in present day to be able to acknowledge that information and the way that I've told it isn't the thing that would have helped anybody. It's
Mhm.
not the thing that would have sold. It's not the thing that would have been received in the way that your present work has been received. I just think that that is such a powerful reflection, and to be able to acknowledge that and move forward from that, I think really is just a testament to the growth that you've experienced and the healing that you've done.
Thank you. Yeah, it it was a journey. It took, it took a long time to get to that space and to be able to write it from there. And I think like once you get there and you've actually done the real work of healing those parts of yourself, that's when the hope comes, right? That's when you can write the hope because you've been through it, you felt it, you've experienced it. If you've not worked through your trauma and you still feel hopeless and helpless and powerless, those are all indicators you're still in your trauma brain. And
Right.
so until you're able to work through that, through feeling it, experiencing it, naming it, then that healing work begins. And then those feelings of hope and what it is and how you feel to let go. So unless you've been through it, you can't write about it. My family was huge on teaching integrity. And if you're going to say something, you better do it. Like, don't just say words. You have to do it. If you speak it out into the world, you better follow up with that.
Mm.
And sometimes that really works for me, to get me to where I need to go. And
The
sometimes it's like,
accountability.
oh gosh, sometimes it's like the death of me. It will like run me into the ground. It will like, make me cranky if I can't follow through on something. And, because I'm thinking of all the ways that I was told that if you don't do it, you're lazy or you're this or you're that or you're full of it. And, my uncles always used to talk about BSers and so don't be a BSer. And so when you say something, you have to do it. And so writing that, that hope comes from that feeling of hope that people read and feel and see. They're able to feel it because they that is like what I'm feeling when I'm writing it. That's what I've been through. It's a realistic journey. And I think that's why people connect with it because it's written from real experience. Like everything I write is from my experience and what I've heard and felt. And so it's it connects because people don't like to write about being human. They don't like to
Right.
admit that they're human. It's like this whole world is so set on being perfect and performing and caring about what we look like and what people will think about us. And what it comes down to is like the parts people are afraid of showing others is that their humanness.
Right.
And so, I live my life being a human and like talking about it all because I know that everybody else is going through it. Everybody else has felt that. Everybody thinks that way about their humanness, but they're just afraid to talk about it. And so
Mm.
seeing someone speak to out about the things that they're feeling inside helps them feel seen. They connect with that. It's just that we don't have the courage to be human because there's so much pressure to be
Right.
perfect.
Right. Absolutely. If someone was interested in starting their own healing journey, what advice would you give to them to begin that process?
I think finding a space where you can say the things out loud. I think it's important to remember as you start your healing journey that your body will never lie to you.
Mm.
We don't trust our bodies. We don't trust our instinct. We're constantly second guessing ourselves and our direction and what we want to do, and we put all the emphasis on talking ourselves out of things. We don't trust our heart and our gut. Like, I knew in my gut I shouldn't have done that, or my heart felt like this in that moment. But then you're like, oh well, and then you make excuses, you make, forgive things because whatever, your brain is able to like push you through that even though your body didn't feel good about it. And so we don't listen to our bodies anymore. We listen to this more. We put so much credibility into our brains, but our brains are divided into three different parts, and there's very few of us who can stay in this part, where
Right.
it's reliable and regulated. The rest of the brain is all emotion and cynical and all of those things, and the bad behaviors and the negativity. And yet we like put so much emphasis on there instead of what's on our hearts and our gut. And so when people are starting to heal, they overthink it, right? It's like, I'm going to heal and I'm going to do the work up here, and I'm going to, figure it out, and I'm going to have a reason and an excuse and all these things. And then I'm going to like make myself get over it, instead of like, what do I feel in this moment? What does my body want to do? Do I have anxiety? Can I breathe? Because if I can't breathe and I have anxiety, that's usually a sign that my body is trying to express feelings, but my brain is not letting them come out. And so
Mm.
then it shows up as anxiety. And anxiety in humans is getting worse because we've been so conditioned to not let our feelings come out. Feelings are bad. You're not allowed to cry. You're not allowed to be bitter because that makes you bad. You're not allowed to be angry. You better control yourself. So it's all about controlling our emotions instead of feeling them. And so now we don't even trust our bodies when they need to do something. And crying heals the chemical pathways in your brain. Like
Right. It
tears,
releases toxins
it's
from your
all
body.
that stuff. And so if your body is telling you it needs to cry, cry. And if you've suppressed your feelings and tears for so long, it's going to be hard to do that at first, because you're going to be thinking, it's too hard, it's too much. If I let myself go, if I let myself cry, I'm going to break, I'm going to lose my mind, I'm going to end up in an institution. And so we think all these things that prevents us from crying, and then we don't let it go. So then it builds up inside of us because we think we don't have time. I don't have time to heal. I don't have time to do this. I'm a busy mom. My kids, I can't, break down in front of my kids, or I have an important deadline I have to do. I don't have time for my feelings right now because I'm afraid that I'll spiral and I won't come back. But your body knows. And so just freaking cry. Just cry. And I share this with people, like, I know that feeling of holding it all in and thinking that if I cry, I might die. Honestly, it is so chaotic inside of here that if I let go and cry, I will die. And so I'm here to tell people, I promise you, you will not die if you let yourself cry. And so that's the hardest part about healing, is we make it a mind exercise. And the therapy part about the exercise, somatic healing, I think, is the closest to like ceremony and Indigenous teachings, because Indigenous teachings is all about everything. Everything is a part of one thing, and you honor all of that. And trauma is a sacred time. It's not a bad thing. It's a moment for you to slow down and like do the work your body needs to do to recover from that, and sit with yourself and be human and feel those things. Don't numb it, right? Like the moment the feelings start to come up, we drink or we pop pills or we jump on the internet and we scroll, or, we gamble or we become a workaholic, because those things are easier for us to do than to actually sit with our feelings. And
Right.
so that's it. Like, if you're starting your healing journey, don't expect it to be one where you're not going to cry or feel bitterness or feel anger. And it's okay to be bitter. It's okay to be angry. Like, those are human emotions that you're allowed to feel. It
Right.
doesn't make you a bad person because you're feeling those things.
I think that is such great advice because, as you mentioned, there's such an evident block within our culture that suggests that we're not allowed to think or feel or do these things. And so providing yourself with the permission to feel the feelings, to cry the tears, to really be in touch with the emotions within your body. So thank you for sharing that. I think that that's incredibly helpful. You have talked about creating safe spaces. And so in this last example, you said, the first thing to start with is having a space where you can say things out loud. What does a truly safe and inclusive space look like to you?
So it's funny, the way I start my trainings now is I always start off by saying there's no such thing as a safe space. And I know that sounds crazy coming from someone who has developed and designed a whole framework and a whole process around cultivating safe spaces. People come into my trainings because they want to learn how to create a safe space for other people. They want to learn how to help other people feel safe. And that's a lie, because we can't make anybody feel anything. I can't
Right.
make somebody feel safe because I did something. I could be sharing, the most lovely, happy story. People think that the most inclusive space has to be because somebody made that happen, and or that the facilitator has the power to make other people feel safe, and that it's my responsibility to do that. And that's a lie, that we believe, because that's what colonialism has programmed us to be, has to be. And so being able to get into that space and like have those honest conversations, and teaching people that you are the only one who can regulate yourself and cultivate a safe space for yourself. You have to be responsible for that, because people don't know each other. Like, even if you grow up with somebody, you don't know the triggers that somebody might have. We think that what I think is safe and what I feel is this and what my experience is applies to everybody. And that's not the way it is. And so the things that make me feel safe aren't going to be the same things that make you feel safe. And those, and for an entire room of people, if we're saying that we're going to do this for everybody, I'm going to be able to make everybody feel safe in this moment. That's a lie. That you can't do that. It's not possible. You have to be able to regulate yourself in the space. And then you have to teach people and share those tools with others on how you're doing that. So then they then have those tools and the ability to co-regulate in that space. And it's only if you're able to do that as an individual that then it becomes a safe space for you to show up. And so, a lot of that is understanding yourself and what your story is, what your triggers are, what makes you respond in the way that you do, instead of blaming it on somebody for you're not safe. You're not making this space safe for me because you're not aligning with what I believe. You're not aligning with my values. You are speaking something that I don't agree with. So now I don't feel safe. And so we even like the way we describe safe and unsafe spaces doesn't actually align with what that is. And one of the things I teach my team all the time and that I share in my trainings is that there's a big difference between feeling unsafe and feeling uncomfortable. And so many times when we get triggered because of what somebody is saying, their tone, their posture, a song, something, we end up getting triggered by that. And then we start to feel uncomfortable. Our brain does feel unsafe because it's reminded us of a time where we weren't safe. But in that moment, in that time and space, it's just really uncomfortable.
Right.
And so can I identify what that discomfort is and where it's coming from so that I can regulate myself back into the here and now in this space? And those are the tools that we're trying to teach, is that there is no safe space. You can't make it for people. Like you can't, you're going to follow all these things. You have to do this and this and this. So I feel safe in your space. I can't do that in life, walking around telling other people how to behave so that I'm safe.
Right.
or you have to do these things in your organization before I'll step foot in it. Because even if they follow the plan and all of the checklist of all of the things that we want other people to do, something's going to happen out of our control and it's going to trigger us. And how are we going to respond to it? Are we going to blame them for not making me feel safe? Right. And so I think
Right.
a lot of that we don't take accountability, and
Hmm.
that's really hard for people who do a lot of work in inclusive and safe spaces to realize that that belief system is upholding colonialism, that
Right.
we believe we have control over our space and that we can control people's emotions and what they think and what they say, because then we're actually getting people to behave a way that isn't naturally the way that they are. And then they're afraid that they're going to say the wrong thing. And then it just becomes this space of fear and shame, because if you then say the wrong thing, you're going to be shamed for it. And
Right.
so how do we show up in those spaces? So I know cultivating safe spaces is a very misleading title for the work that I do, but
But no, I think that it's a very enlightening perspective to think about the fact that the space that we can control is the space within ourselves, and to put in the work and to do our own healing and to identify the things that are triggers for us and how we cope with those things in an environment that is uncontrolled. Because you're right in exploring the idea that it's not realistic to be out walking around and to always feel comfortable and to identify the difference between discomfort and not feeling safe.
Mhm.
And so I think that that is just a great perspective to introduce people to. Now, I would love to chat a little bit about the success that you've had with your books, because as you mentioned, you did have an offer from a traditional publisher and you are an entrepreneur. How has marketing your book been? What are some of the strategies that you've pursued in getting your book in front of its quote unquote ideal audience? Because I think one of the things that our authors really struggle with, or that doesn't come super naturally to them, is having to be the voice for their project, having to step out on social media or at a speaking engagement or a book signing and sell their product. So, can you chat a little bit about what that has looked like for you?
I always tell this story. So my first book, I got the whole package deal, right? The marketing and all of that stuff. And it ended up aligning with what I already knew about marketing. And like, it's all the same, right? It's the same approach, the same identifying people and what their journey is and how they find your book and all of that stuff. And so the approach that I took was just marketing to myself
Mm,
and just sharing my story and my experiences. And I think that's the hardest part for people because they don't like talking about themselves. There's all of
right.
this like mind chatter about like, don't be too full of yourself, or you're just bragging, or like all the things that, it's just uncomfortable. We've been so shamed into like talking about ourselves, or sharing bits about us, or taking up space. You're not allowed to take up space because of this, you're not allowed to take up space because of that. And like, if colonialism had its way, none of us would be taking up space, we would all be shrinking, and just conforming to holding up the way systems are in this world today. I'm just going to get worked up now.
Yeah. I'm so sorry.
So, I think about like all the reasons why, though, like it's so deeply put into us, all these beliefs about how we're supposed to be, what we're supposed to say, what we're going to show up doing, and how we're going to do it. And so we just like, we're constantly like staying small, we're
Right. Walking on
shrinking. Yeah,
eggshells,
don't want to be
trying to,
seen.
right.
It's just so we all feel that. And we don't like criticism. We don't like hearing bad things or negative things about ourselves or our work, and so we stay away from that. And um I just I remember when I got the marketing package and I was like given kind of like the reality check of like, most authors, whether they're traditionally published or self-published, will only sell 250 books. And that's the reality, because there are billions of books out there, and like
Right.
there's like millions of books being published every day. And so what's going to make your book stand out? And so I remember that. And I remember kind of like being prepared for that to happen to me. Like, don't expect too much from this.
Mm-hmm.
So I always take those things as a challenge. So if you're going to tell me I'm only going to sell 250 books, I'm going to sell 1,000. And that was my goal, was like, I'm going to sell 1,000 books just because you told me I'm only going to sell 250. And because I've now said this out loud, I'm going to have to do it. And in
Right.
order for me to do it, I'm going to have to do things I don't want to do. I'm going to have to do things that I'm not comfortable doing. I'm going to have to push myself beyond my comfort zone to put myself out there to do this. And so that's what marketing yourself as a self-published author is. If you cannot push past your comfort zone to do these things authentically, you're not going to sell the books.
Right.
And if you are going in there with a pre-planned script and being that robot, that selling robot, people will feel that. They know you're not being completely honest and true. And if
Right.
you use AI and plug in your key audience and your blah, 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 and you're not talking about you and your experiences, and you're trying to like skip over like that connection piece, they'll know
Mm-hmm.
that. Like, people know that. And so that's why I shared like my advice is like, market to yourself.
Yeah.
Like, market to me as a 19-year-old. What story do I want to share about what I went through when I was 19 and
Mm-hmm.
how I overcame that? What do I want to share about being a teen mom? What do I want to
Right.
share about being someone who has lived with chronic disease and rheumatoid arthritis and fibromyalgia? What do I want to tell myself about getting sober, and like all the things I had to go through to get sober and what that felt like? So all of the stories I share are things that I've actually been through and experienced and felt. And people read that and they're like, yeah, I've been through that too. I know what you're talking about. I feel that. I feel so seen. And they want to be on that journey with you. And
Yeah.
so, what else can you share with me? What else can I learn from you? And, people call that a sales funnel, right? And we call it a relationship pathway. Like, how are
Mm-hmm.
we building that relationship with people? And what does that look like? And I never want to make it feel like I'm trying to sell to you, or that you're going to get stuck buying a product with me because I'm
Right.
not giving you all the information. So I give a lot of free content. I give a lot of
Mm-hmm.
free information to people so that when people finally do decide to invest in me or support me by buying a book or buying one of my e-courses or taking one of my trainings, they know exactly what they're buying.
Right.
I'm not hiding anything. They're trusting the person who referred them, because some people show up in my spaces and they're like, I have no clue what I'm doing here. My friend told me that I have to come and I
Right.
didn't know what to expect, but their friend knew me enough in what I was saying, and they know their friend enough to know that it's going to land with them. And so all of the sales tactics and marketing tactics that they have out there based on fear and scarcity, and like, what are your trauma points? Like, how can I amplify your trauma points so that you can come, buy my thing because I'm going to help you heal your trauma? I will give as much of myself as I have the capacity to give. So people know me. They're not being tricked into anything. And people think they're that scarcity, like, don't give away too much, or, make sure you do it this way because they won't buy from you. I've given away free trainings to people who can't afford it at that time. And I've told people they can take my stuff and use it, and I'm not going to come sue them. And those same people who took it for free in the beginning and used it have come back like 2 or 3 or 4 years later to buy one of my higher end products, because it's this feeling of reciprocity, and it's trusting and having faith in people, that people don't want to be shady or sneaky or these things, but they feel they have to as a survival mechanism. So when we actually put things out into the world to trust and have faith in people and they feel trusted, they want to give that back. And so
Absolutely.
the whole marketing thing is like, how do we market? What are those, where are we marketing from fear, control, and scarcity? And, I really am working hard through my companies and through selling my book to show people that there's another way to do it. You don't have to follow that checklist to get like to convince people to buy something from you. Just be honest, be you, like just be
Right.
you. That's it. And that's hard. And
Yeah,
you have to do
absolutely.
the work to be able to do that. And the work is that inner work.
Mhm.
You got to do a lot of inner work if you want to be able to sell authentically and have people, take in your story in that way. And it's going to be uncomfortable. There's no easy way to do it. People always want the easy route. People always want to take the like cheapest and easiest and less stressful way to do things. And you get what you put in. So if you're half-assing it,
Yeah,
not doing the work,
yeah.
you're not going to get the results. And so it's hard work to be vulnerable and honest and put your full self out there so that you can connect with real people. So my first book has sold over like 17,000 copies.
It's done incredible.
And my second book I just released in April 26th, I think it was. And I've already sold close to 1,000 books already. And people buy it in bulk, right? They buy like 150 books for their college or 150 books for their community or 150 books because they want to gift the book to everybody in their organization. So it's that thing. It's just putting yourself out there and just sharing yourself and you have to be able to do the work so that it's not draining you, right? Like you have had to have done a lot of that healing work so that you don't feel depleted.
Right.
I don't feel completely depleted when I share my full self.
Mm,
I used to in the beginning, but the more and more healing work I've done, the less and less of emotional labor it feels like to be out in the world in that way.
right. I think going back to the idea of scarcity versus abundance mindset. And it's really interesting that you bring this up because the podcast episode that has released today, I'm actually chatting with Monica, who's our head of marketing and co-leads Tellwell. And we chat about manifestation and about mindset. And one of the things that we talked about was scarcity versus abundance thinking. And I really think that abundance thinking goes both ways in the idea that you pouring out abundantly to your community in your raw truth, in your authentic self, in giving a free course to somebody who can't afford it, then attracts that abundance back around within your life, whether that is through the support that you've received in that first book, as you mentioned, just over 17,000 copies sold, which is just incredible, or, having somebody refer a friend to you or to your course and introduce them to you. It is such a mindset and also a lifestyle, I think, to show up in that way where you can acknowledge I've had to pour an abundance of work into myself and am now able to pour that into my community and then have those people turn around and show up in a similar capacity. And talking about selling authentically, I think one of the things that we often see in these conversations of people who have been successful with their self-publishing journey and with their projects is the idea of that two-way engagement, building an authentic community, sharing some of those difficult and vulnerable parts of themselves with their community. Because at the end of the day, people really support people. They show up for the person and that's who they relate to. That's what they resonate with. And so hearing that that is something that you have found to be true, I think is also just really validating for the people who are working through their own marketing journey and trying to show up authentically for their communities.
That's exactly why I love Tellwell. You know, everybody that I've talked to and connected with there, it's just been, it's recognizing that approach that you're trying to do something different, right?
Mm,
Like there's other self-publishing companies, but they still mimic the traditional publishing process, right? Like, so they
right.
think they have to mimic it to help validate them as self-publish or attract authors to them because they follow the same process. And you know, I've talked to a couple of them and I've done my research on them, and I've talked to other authors who've self-published with other, you know, self-publishing companies. And so I'm constantly referring Tellwell because, you know, it's understanding scarcity and, you know, the work that it takes to, you know, move into that abundance mindset. And it's in that whole process, like moving away from scarcity mindset, that is decolonizing, you
Mm,
know, showing up and like helping people share their voice, not in the voice you think they need to be showing up in. That's decolonizing. Like there's just so many things that people are doing to change the way people experience them or their company or what they're doing, and moving more towards human-centered relationships. That centering humanness is decolonizing because it's colonization that has made us believe we have to be perfect performing machines, and everything is like to push it through the, you know, that assembly line to get it done.
mm,
And so, you know, it's just those things, like if we focus on that part and do things different and think different about how we're doing it, like the way we show up and what we receive will be so different. You know, if you're like forcing yourself to go through this checklist because that's how everybody else is doing it, you're going to burn out, right? It's going to be exhausting for you. It's not going to align with how you naturally want to do things or how you think. And so trusting yourself is huge when you're doing the work. Like that doesn't feel right for me, and speaking up. And, you know, it's not every organization is going to, you know, be that same experience all the way through it. But when you run into that person or that department or whoever you're working with and that doesn't align with you, to have the voice to say, that doesn't feel right with me. Can we take a different approach? And then having your own voice because you're also responsible for that. You don't
mm.
have to do it the way somebody's telling you have to if it doesn't feel right. And so many times we push past that and we make ourselves go into that space where we're doing something that we don't really want to do, but we think we have to do it because everybody else did it that way. And if I want to be a real artist or writer, I have to do it this way. I guess that's the route I have to take. And it's not. Like, people, once you're able to like speak up for yourself, you can change your experiences. And then, you know, sometimes we feel like we're forced to go through something. We say yes to a process, we go through it. And then if it doesn't work or if something wrong happens, then we blame them, right? It's
Right.
like their fault that I wasn't successful. It's their fault that this didn't happen for me. But you know what you need to do and you know what feels good and how it's going to work for you, because it has to feel good for you in order for you to be sustainable. Like for this work to be sustainable, you have to feel all in about it, because if you don't, you're going to struggle every bit of the way. And so being able to speak up and have a voice and say, is there another way that we can do this, because this isn't aligning, and then you're more likely to follow through with that. But I know people can also use that as an excuse to not do other things because they feel like it doesn't align. Like, I don't want to share my story publicly. I don't want
Right.
to put myself out there. I'm doing a book tour right now, and it is so opposite of what I like to do. Oh, it's so hard. Like, I don't like sitting at a table and having people line up and
Mm,
wait to get a book signed. That just feels so not aligned with the way I do things. I'd like to sit everybody in a circle and then pass the book around or something like
right.
that, like,
Right.
and then have conversations. But so even that, I was like, how can I do this different? But when you work with like a bookstore or whatever, they have a process and that's the way they do it. And the logistics don't work out because there's bookshelves all over the place. And so
Right.
so there's things, right? Like, just showing up and doing things and being uncomfortable. And I'm so socially awkward. And I think a lot of my readers and community are socially awkward. So there's just a whole bunch of awkward people in the same space at the same time. And it's
Just
been really
standing in their
fun.
own little
Yeah,
space.
exactly. People walk in, they're like,
I found my people. Well, thank you so much for participating in this conversation today. And for those listening, please be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, or you can watch the full episode on YouTube. We'll see you in the next one. Bye.